What up, though? This is Yusef Bunchy Shakur here at the Mama Cool Community House in partnership with Detroit is Different. We're looking forward to bringing you 2022 State of Black Detroit. The haves versus the have-nots. The black middle class versus the black lower class. Is that such a thing? Is that a problem? Are we in an internal war with each other? Are we progressing? Have we digressed? These are questions that we have to ask ourselves. And that's what we plan to doing with this conversation as we get prepared for State of Black Detroit 2022, brought to you by Detroit is Different at the Mama Cool Community House, featuring myself, Yusef Bunchy Shakur.
Welcome back to the Detroit is Different podcast. And I'm here with someone that is a friend of one of the people that really make this whole thing come together. Friend of Suzanne, but more so a friend of Suzanne. From what I saw her presenting in the presentation of a conference, she is a friend to us. And when I say us, legacy Detroiters, people that want to stay in a home, as staying in your home is becoming more of a, I would say, a human rights issue. It may have always been. It has always been. It's just as prevalent as a human rights issue in 2022 as it probably was long ago, especially when you think about cities like Detroit. So, Sarida Scott, how are you today?
Okay, I'm well. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Oh, all is well. All is well. See the whole professor vibe and everything. I'm with it. I feel like I'm about to get that. I guess they would say knowledge, but I still call it game. You know what I'm saying?
I do my best.
I feel like I'm about to submit a paper. I feel it. So before we get into that, I just gave somewhat of an introduction for me on board, and people that are familiar with Detroit is Different know that. But professor at UAD Mercy, you have a wealth of experience in knowledge in communities, especially in Detroit and in different stock. And before we get all into that, let's just get into classic Detroit story. What's the Detroit story? What brings you or your family to this city?
Oh, my goodness. The classic Detroit story. First, I will always say I am just a very passionate Detroiter.
I like that.
Love the city. My Detroit story is very similar to everyone else's. You know, My family migrated here. My dad from Alabama, my mother's mother from Georgia. But I think I have a lot of having that kind of classic Detroit story touches on a lot of different things. My mother lived in Black Bottom, so she was one of those families that moved when they did the, urban renewal and decimated the whole neighborhood. I grew up on both. I probably claim Eastside a little bit more, but I grew up on both sides. Jeff Chalmers, 6 Mile, Livernois. I went to Renaissance High School, so I'm just, there's lots of little Detroit stories within my story.
So it's like, wow, you came over here, saw two-way streets, and was like, wow, this is amazing. I'm just messing with my east side.
You know what?
It's like, this can happen?
I just love the hate. East side is wonderful.
I love it. So you mentioned Alabama and Georgia, and as we look at a lot of the great migration lines, I mean, they follow the train lines, but those are two of the places where a bunch of black folks migrated from. That's why it's always surprising when I meet black folks and be like, my people from Texas or from Arkansas or something. I'm like, y'all didn't go to Chicago? But Alabama, Georgia, whereabouts in Alabama and Georgia?
Ooh, Alabama, Lowndes County. So
Lowndes County.
Which is like outside Montgomery.
Okay.
And in Georgia, it's, what's that little bitty town? The little town that's known for having all the catfish. I can't even think of the name because this is my grandmother. My mother's born in Detroit, right?
Where is this?
There's like a little town in Mississippi is like the catfish headquarters. That's where her family's from.
Okay, so Montgomery has a strong ties to Detroit for many reasons.
Yeah.
Did you have like some of those connections that carried over in extended family?
Not really. My dad has his own very interesting story. And so almost all the family moved up here. He didn't really know his father. It had always been an interest of mine of going back down there and kind of tracing his roots. My grandmother on the other side was, she was a very typical, didn't really want to talk about what happened down south. And honestly, for your listeners, if they haven't already, I would strongly encourage everyone to read The Warmth of Other Suns. Because if you don't get the migration story from your family, which a lot of my family just didn't want to talk about it, you understand why when you read the book. And it just brings into context just how harrowing it was down there. And the people who left were leaving, for in a lot of instances, hell.
Yeah.
I hadn't even really thought about it. You just get so used to that narrative of everybody coming up, and we always think that was about, obviously it was some opportunity and jobs, and we know the promise of the $5 wages, in the auto industry. But the flip side of the story is that a lot of them were just leaving really terrible situations, a lot of fear, a lot of just horrible conditions. And her work in that book is just amazing and really gives us a better understanding of our history.
Definitely add that to the list of things that I want to catch into as, Coleman A. Young's autobiography starts with that. You see the connection between escaping the Ku Klux Klan and the need to sneak away to Detroit.
Yep.
And this is also what kind of disjoints some of our family histories, because a lot of names had to change because of needed safety precautions.
People didn't want to talk about it. Yeah, but unfortunately, you're right. What that did for us is that a lot of times we don't have the connections. We didn't have a lot of family where a lot of families would go back, every summer and visit. We went a couple of times, and you have the kind of memories that you read about, dirt roads. I had a great aunt living in like a shack, that kind of thing. But we never went as I got older. And I think that was also partly my father wanting to put that behind.
Yeah. And it's unique as I hear more of these stories. And I had a really rich interview sometime in this year at the shout out Lazar, the Black Spirits Conference. That it's also a lot of it's not one of those things where I know people are thinking ka-ching, but many of our families still do have properties and lands in these spaces. And when I say it's not a ka-ching thing, meaning you're not gonna just walk up on a farm full of abundant oranges, and be like, hey, white man, get off my property. You know what I'm saying? It's probably gonna be a little bit of cultivating, definitely involve the courts, but this is commonplace for many of us. But that disconnect is definitely not spoken about usually. Jimmy Boggs, another legendary Detroiter, has that same story where it's nah, I don't even want to venture into that thought process. So that story does reign true. So into Detroit, Black Bottom, your parents, how do they meet in Black Bottom? How do they intersect?
So my mom's a real Detroiter. My dad is a Southern boy, as he said. So he didn't come up until he was about 16.
Okay.
They met in high school, Eastern High School. And they were just friends. And then my dad went to the Air Force.
Wow.
And they wrote letters. And when they came out, they got married.
The old school DM.
Right. And they have been married 56 years in August.
Wow, that is beautiful. So with that, I'm pretty sure maybe your whole life your mom's been jazzing on them about the accent or something.
So I think when they were younger, but then my dad went to school, and he actually used to teach. My father used to teach at Wayne State. He used to teach psychology. So I think he tweaked it as he started moving in different circles.
As they would say, the different in it, they'd be like, you still got cotton under your fingernail.
Yeah.
One of those classic jabs. Some of us city folk.
Oh, yes. I think he got a lot of that when he first moved up here. Because he was late to the game, coming up in high school.
So in that world, with that's unique. Psychology. As you know, usually it sparks a lot of young students. Like that first year you go to college, it's like, wow, psychology is interesting because you're being pitched all these theories and Sigmund Freud and the brain and the id and the this and the that, and Kari Fraser, not necessarily even a Detroit is different thought process. A lot of that stuff is from black doctors and black science, period. But you know, that's Kari.
Yeah, no.
So, but with that, to follow through and to stick in that space, and then you said Air Force too. That may line him up. Did he actually serve? Did he actually do a tour of duty?
No, he did not. This was he graduated from high school in 59. He was in the service from like 60 to 64.
Wow.
So he missed, stationed in Barcelona. Picked up a little Spanish, and but did have the opportunity to use the bill to go to school.
That's powerful, and that also is very that's peaceful, because during that time when we think of so many of the close of what was happening in Korea, the rise of what was happening in Vietnam.
No, he just missed it.
You know, and he was like right in the window where it was I don't have to go through that trauma.
Yeah.
And then when we think about your childhood, what we're saying Black Bottom for that. What neighborhood would you say do you remember most as a child?
Oh, Jeff Chalmers. So
wow.
Jeff Chalmers.
The big houses and long streets.
Well, you know what? Two-family flat. Grandmother and uncles lived upstairs, and then our family lived downstairs. But very classic childhood for a Gen Xer. Close-knit neighborhood kind of thing, lots of kids. I mean, it was so different. I remember just being, 6 with groups of kids walk into the store and stuff you don't think people would feel like you couldn't do nowadays. It was just a very different time.
And Jefferson Chalmers, as that is one of the, as we say, targeted neighborhoods of revitalization in some ways, and then in other ways, when you talk to the people over there, especially legacy Detroiters, it's but it also anchors, like I immediately think of the Fisher Mansion and Hare Krishnans, and we think of being close to the water.
Yes.
And the stock of the homes over there have such unique builds and designs.
Very much,
almost definitely artistic, but by design, it's like that housing stock is a, what would I say? Like the doorway is so differentiated.
It's really eclectic. I mean, when you drive through there, the mix, and it's sad now because certain streets still look amazing. Like Marlboro, has some just mind-blowing homes. And some of them, like Newport, just unfortunately a lot of blight and a lot of homes that are gone. But growing up over there, it was just beautiful. I always tell people I don't think I fully appreciated Detroit, growing up in Detroit until I left, and then you come back. But I remember things like I went to Guyton. There was a school over there. It's closed now, unfortunately. And we had a black principal, Miss McCrary. And I can remember seeing her as a, kindergarten, first grade in the halls and just how she carried herself and how stately, it really had an impact on me growing up in a black city that I didn't fully appreciate until I got older.
Wow. And with that, Renaissance.
Yeah.
And the old Renaissance.
Oh, yes, the old building.
So with it, and I've interviewed some other people that have told, like, I've actually interviewed people that were like, yeah, I was at part of the first class of Renaissance or the first class
not
of DSA.
That old.
And things like, I know you're not, but I'm saying.
But I was in the 80s.
the old Renaissance, just like the old DSA, and I'm not taking anything away from the current DSA or the current Renaissance. It was the familial, I guess, atmosphere, environment. It felt different. Like, just observing even from the outside in of my friends that went to Renaissance, it's like they almost knew everyone in the school. The buy-in for where things would track would be different. Like, we went to 2 Renaissance parties in like my high school tenure or whatever, and immediately they like, who you here with? And I'm like, wow, this is not this is not the usual feel. And that's where I meant, like, did you, as you say that you noticed your Detroit story, did you notice by that Renaissance, like, what was your take on Renaissance?
Oh, I had a great time. I loved Renaissance. You're right. I mean, it was smaller. It was, and I think part of what you pick up on that closeness is, because you're right. Remember when we went to Renaissance, it hadn't even been open 10 years, and so to a certain extent, we had to kind of be a close knit because we were already getting that kind of flack from the other schools. Renaissance. What was Renaissance? First it was like, because you're not named after like all the other schools before they changed the names. You're not named after someone. People don't understand what the hell does it mean, And then our mascot was a phoenix. They had to explain which I think has a very symbolic meaning, obviously, rising from the ashes. But so all of that, I think, meant that we were very close knit because we were a bit of an outlier in the DPS, and so you had Detroit Public Schools. So yeah,
definitely. What did you? And you say you loved the experience. And more so, like, just even your peers, and the faculty. Like, when I hear those stories, it's like, wow, this was just like a different type of, like, this was like Bayside High, the black version or something, like you know what I'm saying? Like, this is not, as it's nothing like my Northwestern experience. Let's put it like that.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, the other thing is, and I just coming from a family of educators.
Okay.
The nicest thing is when you have the ability to interact with a teacher that loves what they do. And I think a lot of the teachers there loved what they did. And they probably, I have to think about, I never thought about before, but they probably felt like they were also on the cusp of doing something different because it's a whole new school that was supposed to be, for our children, that was, focused on getting them college prep and all of that. So yes, a lot of them, I think they felt very connected to what they were doing, and they were passionate about their work.
Okay. So from Renaissance, where do you go in your journey?
U of M.
So that's another classic connection. It seems like a lot of Renaissance students go to U of M.
Well, I mean, one thing I tell people, for us, was fortunate for us, back then, U of M was cheap, in-state. And they also did on-the-site admissions. It's very anticlimactic, but it's also very nice. They come there, they look at all your stuff. You're sitting in a room with the person, and then they're like, okay, welcome to U of M. I mean, it's wonderful to then be like, oh, you're in. You don't have a lot of the anxiety, or at least I didn't have a lot of the anxiety a lot of people did about waiting to hear about school. But it also felt a little anticlimactic. You don't get the big letter in the mail and all of that. But I had an older sister who was already there.
Okay.
And it was affordable, and I didn't want to go to MSU. No offense, people, but I just liked U of M better.
Yeah, it may be about 30 people like throwing.
I know. Well, my best friend went to MSU, so I was there hanging out with her. I love her. Go Green. Okay. But
now you got the other half of people like, what? She said what?
I will say I love my people. I'm not like a rabid U of M fan. I root for every home team, but I'm not, like crazy with it.
So and it's unique as I get in some of these discussions. My interview with Aaron Bevel and even Chase Cantrell at U of M students that in Proposal 2, like it was during, I'll say like late 90s, early 2000s. When we think about a couple of things were happening under the guise of race, admissions, in the stomping grounds, and from the outside in some of U of M stance, and it was a lot,
Yeah.
What did Ann Arbor feel like for you as a student, and what was your take as you watched all of that play out?
So we're going to have to go back first because I'm early 90s. So we'll talk about when all that was playing out. I was
later.
Like, yep, I was later, but I do have some comments on that. So for me, it was different But it also, like you said, there's so many Detroiters who were at Michigan. You really found your place.
Yeah.
And then for me, my other place turned out to be the Black Student Union. And so I was really active in that, became the secretary. And so our real issues were with the university. And, there's lots of just trying. I mean, there were unfortunately still a lot of issues happening in the 80s, race issues among students and dorms, with events. So a lot of the fights that we were having with the university was around their commitment to Black students, recruitment, retention, all of that. Those were like a lot of issues we were having then.
So, and as you speak to that, back to another Kari Frazier, and this may stand as a Detroit is different stage too. Like many American institutions, ain't no many, all American institutions. Meaning, when I say institutions, I'm thinking like education,
Formal.
justice, medical, business. Like finding the place and space for us for Black people, it's been a fight. Nothing. The opportunities just with clear access are definitely opportunities you don't want access to for us.
Right.
So it's less a discussion on U of M, but just more so just higher education itself. How do you think that those strides that you were making then, like, did you see some of that work with the Black Student Union as like a preview of where you're at now, like in learning about organizing and learning about actually, getting your voice heard and centering someone outside of our culture to understand what's needed within our culture? Or did you see it as like a fight that's like, I am in this fight because everybody else is kind of in this fight, but I don't know if we can win this fight?
When you're young, it's interesting. When you're young, I don't feel like, at least I didn't, the concept of winning or losing wasn't on the thing. It just felt like the thing you had to do. And also, I always, my family always tells a story of me being young. For some reason, was always centered on justice and fairness. And so the fact that it was, you're seeing injustices in a place where you're supposed to be welcome, it's supposed to be meant for you, where you're all paying the same, kind of money, it just really kind of, at least for me, propelled me to get involved. There's a clear trajectory from all of that to what I'm doing now. But, at the time, I didn't see it. It was just, you wanted change. At least I did. I wanted change, so.
And I don't like to think in absolutes, but I do like to think of like barometers. So at that time, like if you had to put on a scale of 0 to 100, was it like, do you think it was more ignorance and not knowing how to engage and keep engaged, a lot of the Black students, or was it more so neglect, which I know it's a thin line between ignorance and neglect, but...
That's interesting. I think it may all be the same, which is, so now we're getting into like the philosophical stuff. Like
Yes.
Philosophically, where I am, I just don't think there is really. I don't think there was then, and I don't think there is now, any real care or concern. And I link all of that to like capitalism. When money is your primary
Bottom
focus, then you don't really give a shit about people. I mean, let's just be real. And so you care when people make you, in my opinion, when you're forced. And so I don't think that it was that like the university was really thinking about us. I don't think it was on their radar. I don't think they were back then checking the numbers of how Black students or other students of color were doing, or what it would be like for, to having less than 10% of Black people in a campus that's like 30,000 plus, and how you are interacting. And there was not nearly as much conversation around the transition from coming from, an urban school that was less resourced, and there wasn't as much of that talk, there wasn't as much of that data. And so there were some things they had already done, and typically they were led by Black people. So there was like, what was it called? CSP, Comprehensive Studies Program, but that, we all felt like that's like remedial for us. But I mean, that was still our space because there was also additional help. I was in engineering. There was a minority engineering program office, and again, so there were some, and these were all led by Black educators. But I also still think we hadn't moved to a place of connecting outcomes with history. And so a lot of times the emphasis was always on the personal responsibility. Remember, we're still, again, this is late 80s, early 90s. There's still a lot of that, wanting to prove that we can compete, which we obviously could, but not understanding what it meant to come from a place that's under-resourced, what it meant to come from a family that's struggling, all of that, and how that's all linked to what was done in this country to Black people. So we hadn't done a lot of that at that time. I feel like a lot of it was more on, we got to make sure y'all come up here and ready to work, which I still am about, being, personal responsibility, but you can't minimize and all the other aspects.
It's a responsibility of onboarding. Like, even with what I do with Detroit is different. We were having a short conversation about this space is a community space. So as much as I love this tech stuff, I have to keep in mind that everyone's vision isn't, they're not going to sit and watch hours of like, wow, Tascam just created a new board that I can do this with, and then I can switch. Some people just want to come in here and do a show.
Right.
So if their onboarding is that, as the person with the space, I believe the onus and responsibility relies on me to make sure that in this community space, I have the resources at the level of who's coming in. Though it's a relationship, it's reciprocity,
right.
But I also must have the resources so that this person can not feel as though they're a fish out of water.
Right. Because obviously there's a difference. I mean, there are the people who genuinely needed help and are failing out. And then there are people, yes, who did nothing and are failing out. But those are like different populations. We're not going to, lump them all together.
So in this, and all of this, I think connects to even your position today. So like you were, college student and not necessarily tying to victory, but you're in a front line pushing a discussion where now faculty and others, because I am aware just through my kid's sister, Mashar, that went to U of M, and she went through as they say, they call it like, oh, that's the Black program. But now many universities have this program where, maybe two weeks, maybe 10 days before the rest of the campus gets there, you have Black students helping. And in my mind, I believe that some of that organizing of you all led to programs like that to exist at U of M and other schools. Like, and I guess this long question, as I can be in Kari nature, to say like, do you think that when those connections are made, like now that like some of the Black faculty sees the Black Student Union working, they're like, okay, we need to respond to this and we need to take this discussion and move it forward beyond where the students may not necessarily be able to see the victory, but we can move this discussion forward.
That's exactly how I think it should work. So in this moment, with a very recent protests that have been happening, and I have children, I have a stepdaughter, and I remember she was out, in protests, and I was telling people that I don't really go to many protests anymore because I feel I have a different responsibility. And I said the same thing in 2020 with what was happening in Detroit. And I was like, our responsibility, if we are in any kind of position of some kind of influence, is to take those demands that are coming from the activists and then see how we are putting them into place and putting into practice. So yes, I feel like it's supposed to be a continuum. And I think it is a real, at least it was for me, very much a growth moment of going through protests and being more on the ground, and then picking a career path and understanding how it's supposed to be connected and how you're actually supposed to get change. So now when you say like winning though, I think there's a lot of elements of change.
Mm-hmm.
And, I recently said that part of the reason I'm in this position now is I'm getting older. I've been back in Detroit 25 years, working in Detroit and living in Detroit and working in community the entire time. And it can wear on you. And I was like, in this moment, I believe it is my time to help develop new leadership. Because I could see at my last position, a feeling I never before always felt like, where's the win? But I was beginning to feel like I don't even know if the win can happen. I always say, I believe it is worth the fight. This is our country. We made all this. We are deserving of everything that it has to offer. But I also said, at least for me sometimes, I don't know if this country wants to get better. When you have this kind of capitalism that has gone berserk, in my opinion, how can you really, where's your real commitment to affordable housing? Where's your real commitment to equity? Where's your real commitment to everyone being able to just, afford a decent life? I don't know that it exists on a large scale, I don't know. But I definitely think it is worth the fight, and I want to assist young leaders in their work.
And as you, in that role also, the next question becomes, there are other players, especially when we think of Detroit, in this social justice, community organizing, nonprofit world, that don't have the onboarding you have, that were never in that space of being an activist, that never attended a protest, that don't, that never got that, 2 o'clock in the morning phone call about like, all right, so when we get down there, we need buses and food. They're coming from a whole other orientation of like, I was so swayed by what I saw, but now I just want to step into a position to influence change. What's the difference between the person that actually was, boots on the ground in that protest versus the person that feels like, you know what, I was kind of, for lack of a better term, I was kind of on the Uncle Tom side of the game, and I woke up when I saw that, and now I'm moved to advocate for my people.
You said, what's the difference?
Yes.
Obviously, this is my opinion on what's the difference.
Yes, definitely.
Sadly, sometimes for me, I think the difference is in how people want to approach the solution or how they think we're going to affect change. And so I'll say as an example, for my generation and a lot of, what I'd say middle-class Black professionals, what I've observed is that it feels like a lot of times their vehicle of change, their approach is that we need more Black people with more money. If I'm making money, it's like, Black people are doing good.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that approach. I always like to say this, I'm not opposed to money. Okay? I'm not going to act like I'm opposed to money. But I just by Black people having money does not mean that we are addressing, it's not getting us to what I would say is a point of actual social justice or equity. I think when you, at least coming through it the way that I did, it just becomes, it just speaks to, it's just really like who you are as a person. Everyone likes different things. Everyone's attracted to different things. I'm not saying everyone has to do the same thing. Obviously, in my family, everybody wasn't doing the same thing that I did. But my hope is at least that everyone, particularly in our community, because we're such a special people. I believe that we are a special people. I would at least hope that you always feel a connection to community. As an example of one of the examples I use all the time, and I think because it just really hit me, was during the issue around community benefits in this city. When I would have felt that any black person would have understood what it meant to say a development project that's going in a particular neighborhood should have to commit to providing some kind of benefit to the impacted population, that to me just seemed like an easy one. And we're giving them subsidy. So let's not say that they're not just doing their own money. They're getting some tax dollars. How is that not easy one to say, yes, they should do some benefits? And the fact that there were so many black professionals who were like against it, honestly, almost like broke my heart.
Wow.
I was like, that's not even, we've unfortunately in the city gotten in such this narrative of, the Detroit, being the underdog, and we got to convince everyone to come here and invest their money and do things. And I think we're moving a little bit away from that now. But at that moment, I was just like, really, y'all, come on. I mean, come on.
And that right there is why it's funny. I'm fresh off of, you probably know a fellow Detroit is Different podcast, my homie Piper. We always debate this.
Yes, Sister Piper, yes.
I'm not as much of an anti-capitalist. I had the classic debate last year with Baba Malik, and some of this is definitely my orientation of
That's
my father being a
my
CPA.
brother, Baba Malik. Oh, your father's a CPA?
And my grandfather being a nightclub owner and everything. Like, to me, and they always say, well, that's not capitalism, brother. That's not I'm saying it's a lot of jargon to me that, like, first off, this is Cardi Frazier's statement. America, and I've said this before, America's a criminal enterprise. This is stolen land, stolen labor, and it actually was a stolen loan from Britain. That whole Boston Tea Party was almost like, I lent you money, and now I'm coming back.
Defaulting. All right.
And now you like, guess what?
I'm like, I'm not paying.
Yeah, Portugal and France just gave me some weapons, so we ain't paying nothing. Right. And we're going to take that tea, and we're going to throw it over you know what I'm saying?
Tell you what we think about you.
And now we're going to turn around and say, hey, here go the Constitution.
We're not even part of y'all anymore.
So when we say that it's capitalism, when so much is subsidized, meaning like in subsidies or millages, basically our tax money is building, when I was talking to Theo Pride, Detroit People's Platform, our tax money built Little Caesars Arena. I don't know if people recognize this.
Yes.
Little Caesars right now is the biggest pizza corporation across the world. If you travel the world, you're going to see more. You wonder why you're not seeing, well, we know why we ain't seeing Papa John's commercials, but you know why you're not seeing Pizza Hut commercials anymore? Because Little Caesars has taken over the pizza industry. That world headquarters and all of that stuff, they're all across the world right now. So we have the largest, and we know how much the world, especially Americans, love pizza. They have the money to buy their own. Here's another one that I always throw out.
And that was one of the projects that catalyzed people's activism. And to this day, I've not set foot in there. I've never been to Little Caesars Arena because it was wrong. It was wrong.
The other one, and it's layers even to that. Like, it blew people's mind. Like, when I told them, I was like, when we found out in the quote-unquote build of Little Caesars Arena, we found out that Joe Louis Arena didn't pay a DTE bill for 6 years. But the reality is, like I say, if the as you say, the Detroiter we want to welcome want to come down for a hockey game, you're not going to turn the lights off on them. But Detroit is Different lights will get cut off.
Right. We'll cut off
if I tried to go 6 months without paying.
Right.
Let alone 6 years. Right. So that's the brazenness to me of the gangsterism of what we call capitalism. Because if you and me want to do business, supply got to meet demand. We got to get resources. We have to function more by the book of what they say. The one premise that I do say from all my business training, like I always say, is capitalism says you have to enlist scarcity, which I don't believe scarcity is built. I think scarcity is created to push people with an urgency to buy, especially in this real estate industry. That made,
oh my goodness!
I mean,
of course, it's a business tactic.
Yeah,
and I don't know why people hate. I mentioned it to some small business. Shout out all my small business owners. I used to be a small business owner. Obviously, I love small business owners, but I wasn't happy with this whole thing of it's a tactic. I was joking with my daughter. I was like, I'm not gonna wait in line, a long ass line to get a pie. I can make my own, but also And I put that on somebody's little social media, like, I get it. You only may make certain, it drives up the demand. People want to feel like, I got to wait in that line because I got to get this pie because it's about to be sold out.
Yeah.
And I'm not mad at you, but please, let's be honest about it. It's a tactic.
Yeah,
because you could probably make more pies than that. Yeah. I know, I've been there.
Like right now, as the Fed is raising interest rates, and we're clearly seeing that the market is crashing before our eyes soon. If you meet a realtor right now, they're gonna say, "No, man, this is the best time to buy." Like you will never meet a realtor that says, "You know what? You may want to sit around, save up a little bit more money."
Exactly.
And then buy a house.
Exactly. And I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell you the one example I use that's my biggest frustration with capitalism. I got to go to this program, one of the Harvard nonprofit programs, and this one data piece always stayed with me. They showed us a graph of the difference between the employees and the owners, the employers, like back from like in the 70s. Back then, like the difference, I'm holding my finger. I'm on camera, that's right. It was like this.
I know.
Now, it's like this.
The wealth to...
It's sickening.
Yes, the wealth poverty gap is so... The disparity has gone up like... Okay, it went up... First off, Reagan era, it went up maybe fourfold. Then you have... The second Bush, it went up maybe eightfold on top of that. Even during Barack Obama, it went up like another twofold. Under Trump, it went up like threefold. Right now, under President Biden, like the disparity is at a way where, you know, like it's almost laughable when they say the middle class versus the non-middle class, because just due to our propensity, here's another economic term. Propensity means basically how fast that, the old school when my mom say, money burning a hole in your pocket. Our propensity to spend due to our conditioning and where things are at is so fast that even if you give, the whole thought process, even the whole quote unquote, we're going to give a stimulus. I mean, it was already known that like if you give Americans, every American gets $2,000, it will be back in the market within maybe like a day and a half. People were spending their stimulus check just knowing that it's going to come soon.
What they wanted to do.
Yes.
Which is what they wanted. And the disparity is astronomical. But the sad part is that you keep people thinking that if they just worked harder, they could get up to that top level. And that's a fallacy.
Kari, story time.
It's just, and that's the sad part. That's the piece of capitalism that is sad to me and disgusting.
Kari, story time. Comedian Patrice O'Neal always joked about this, of saying like most Americans, like it's almost like this is back to the conditioning and propaganda. I'm big in media and stuff of America. Like every American in the back of their mind thinks I'm gonna be a millionaire.
Of course.
So I would rather have these programs that will help a millionaire, because one day I'm going to be on top of that hill. But here's the story time for me. I started at Henry Ford Community College, and I, always taking these business classes. But even an introduction to business at Henry Ford Community College, of my class of 35 people, 25 of them all saw themselves as millionaire, and of the 25, 18 of them wanted to own a bar or restaurant, which if you know anything about business, those are the businesses that have the highest rate of failure within 1 to 3 years. But everyone in the class is like, nah, but the way I do my ribs and the way I got my sauce and the way I do this, and this is the other thing of onboarding, as I tell a lot of people they don't like. When I say this, I'm like, you're thinking as a consumer and you're not thinking as a business owner, because you're saying how good the product is. The leverage, and this is another offshoot and another economic term, externality. Externality is basically something external that you don't expect to happen connected to business. But an externality of business, like the hot and ready $5 pizza, is that the best way to profit is to work your margins better. Meaning like you can have the best, we all are aware that the hot and ready pizza is not the best pizza, but the margins that they make on whatever tomatoes, dough, and cheese are such great margins that they put a lot of the competition out of business, because it's like almost like, okay, is this Pizza Popula's pizza better than a Little Caesars pizza? Yes. Pizza Popula wants $20 for a pizza. Little Caesars wants $5. And now we're saying value. So it's like, I would rather... It's not $15 better, though I know it's better.
But they figured out a way to how to put it all together.
Yes.
They maximize, like you said, on their margins,
Yeah.
and they spoke to a concept that we've bought into, which is we want everything yesterday.
Instantaneous.
Exactly.
Hot and ready.
So, right, even if it's crap,
Hot and ready and marginal.
Right,
It's better than as long as it's supposed to probably really take the cook and be good.
Exactly. I mean, they figured it out.
Excellent.
But that's the thing. That's a part of the business is figuring out how to capitalize on the American culture.
Yes, and we've been assimilated and conditioned, because I'm big into that. Like, I like marketing. I like how people perceive messages, even how things are framed. I find fascinating. Like, if you watch a movie or different things with me, like, I can get real nerdy even about the way words are placed around different things, because this all has to do with even where we're at now, where I want to drive into this Detroit story and that Detroit narrative of first off, what happened to our housing stock of Detroit? Because it's a couple of different iterations, especially in a community like mine, where we had and then one person may say, well, the correlation makes sense, but even per capita, meaning that black home ownership per capita in Detroit from the 60s through maybe like the late 90s, even like early 2000s, was so vast versus any other place. But then slowly but surely, a lot of my elder neighbors kept receiving from some of them, a lot of them actually, from the richest man in the state, quote unquote, business, refinancing options. So a lot of people hawk their house, as they say in the streets, meaning you take money out. A lot of grandparents are thinking, oh, this is a good rate. We lock you in, and, you can get, $60,000. And like, a grandma or grandpa is thinking like, I'll give $10,000 to the kids. I can fix these windows, get them up to par. And in this whole world where they know they would jam you, and so many people lost their homes in my community connected to the refinancing of it. So like, when you don't tell that part of the story, hence the culprit that led to why my community looks the way it looks, you're really leaving out the conditions of what happens to a community like mine. And you're in this whole space. So the housing stock of Detroit, which these rich homes, and you speak about the neighborhood you grew up in, and in so many of these refinancing options. And then this is the sickness also of, as you say, the system of America, that there is no consequence for these bankers, these these lending companies, the people that tore apart communities like mine, like yours.
No, there's not. Yeah, I mean, I was just sitting here just as you're talking, reflecting on, there's so many different aspects. I mean, there's so many different parts, not aspects, parts of that story.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is where I always say, I'm not a historian, but you have to understand the history to even get up to that part of the story. Because otherwise, I feel then you have it wrong.
Yes.
And you're right. There, that story just of the mortgage issue and the predatory lending, it does. It plays into the fact of having a population that you knew you could easily target. It plays into our feelings about what we wanted to do as, what you want to do as family or parents, like you said, for others, or plays into the fact, at least when you're looking at Detroit, how you redlined and concentrated poverty in a city that had one industry that changed so dramatically that left thousands, without
displaced.
Exactly, and without any work, and then what does it mean, and how people, had to leave or jump ship or all this vacancy. I mean, there's like all this different pieces of it that's many of which is very tragic.
Very, and in a community like mine, and I recognize a lot of my perspective of this deals with my family background. What I've been exposed to. So I see things differently. So in a community like mine, I love being over here. So I find my peace over here. It's deep. But I do recognize a lot of my neighbors feel trapped over here. Because their orientation here and how they center themselves and even what they look at as success or what a good place is completely different. So that brings the next discussion. You talked about development. We're facing something currently right now. When I say facing something, my community, we were sued by a development that's just sprung up. It began build this past summer, and with it, and I'm learning more about it and talking to more neighbors. The properties, and this is so unique, were labeled as, it was like brownfield, as you talk about subsidies, brownfield money. So it's government money going into this project that they're building across the freeways. But in this footprint, they want to break some of the community benefits agreement of the CDC over here, Hope Village Revitalization. And also they sued myself and maybe about 150, maybe about 200 other residents to break deed restrictions. So when you see stuff like this, on one hand, my neighbors are like, like one of my neighbors, elder woman, she had a stroke when she never got sued in her life. So, you getting served.
They are suing you all to do what? For
they
what?
want to break the deed restriction.
What's the deed restriction that exists?
So the deed restriction that exists, and we're definitely going more scientific.
And I'm sorry.
But I like it. The deed restriction is they want to change the alley easement. And to me, I look at this as like, I love sports. So to me, this is like a jab. If they break the alley easement, the thought process is now they can, they're like, they say, well, you will be able to own more of your alleys, but then we can travel through your alleys better and it'll be more clean. This is the way they package it and sell it. But also, I think the lawsuit was an act one in the whole thing to just see how what's the, as you say, what is the consciousness of the neighborhood itself? Because if we see that in most defaults, I didn't, but I'm still collective with my people as we document this. But a lot of those lawsuits default, and you rezone this and you make it more industrialized. You make this space in my community as by being now a brownfield. And I've been talking about this more. It's like it reassesses my property value. And a person may say, well, if you don't want to sell your house, Corey, why does your property value matter? Because I got to insure this stuff. It impacts my insurance, which impacts my car insurance. So now I went from a residential community to a residential/industrial community. Like, all because one development that enters into my community with tax money, and they use the Highland Park address side, and that was savvy too because, Highland Park's documentation and transparency when it comes to their Brownfield Fund, which started with this development, and even their economic development wing is consultant Mr. Tyrone Hinton. So it's not as transparent as if they went with the Detroit address side. Like, this was a savvy move.
Did Hope Village help you all, help the residents in any of that? Like, did any attorney come in and represent?
We're still in the act of it, and I said, definitely partnered with Hope Village on the board, know a lot of the people. But even with Hope Village was sued because the community benefits agreement, even in breaking that, the what they're saying is the community benefits ordinance in this space was warehousing alcohol and warehousing explosives. They're saying the explosives will just be for fireworks, but that still makes us feel like, okay, this is in the middle of Highland Park in the hood. Y'all can have all types of weapons going into Ukraine over there or something like that if you clear this. So, like, the rezoning and the breaking of deed restrictions changes everything in our community moving forward for a lot of us as residents.
Are you reporting on this?
Yeah, I'm putting a lot. I'm actually going to release with this interview this week. I'm going to put up a lot of the pieces. We've done some community meetings. We're going to do some more community meetings specific to this. It's one resident that actually kept his home, and it's weird. They built around his home, and they're tearing down his street sign like every other week and stuff. This is something that I didn't expect.
What corporate? So does your? I'm sorry, I'm asking all these questions. This is just me and my capacity of work. Is your city council person involved in this?
Not yet. I do have a relationship with Council Member Calloway's office. I let her know, and I mean, I think she's more responsive than my former council member. But even with the amount of things laying at her desk, and I've sent her some more information. I think once I package this story into videos, I will send to her. But this is also a Detroit and Highland Park matter, so I'm gonna send this and get this message going in a couple different ways.
And what about the department? And I would say the Department of Neighborhoods too. And I'm only saying that and asking because, what a way of acting in bad faith as a corporate, supposedly a corporate entity that should be viewing themselves as a part of the community. I mean, if it was just about wanting some access to the right of way, that could have easily been done without a lawsuit. It could have easily been done in some kind of engagement with the community. But you're right. It feels like it is hiding the fact that they really just want to take it all. Or do something. Yes.
Well, it's like I say, I love sports. It's like an analogy. Like I always say, like sometimes in boxing, a boxer will throw a jab, not to land the jab, but just to see how you respond. To me, the lawsuit was a jab. So in getting more, and now you're the interviewer and I'm the interviewee. So this project is layered because this project originally was one of the few, as I say, like looked at superstars in development, and he was a brother. So Eric Means was leading this project before he passed away. I don't know if you're familiar with Eric Means. Eric Means was a big party, a part of a couple different apartment developments, but the Garden Theater may be more of what people kind of connect the Means group to. I mean, when he passed, you get a letter statement from Mayor Duggan, I want to say Lieutenant Governor, you get Brendan Jones, like a lot of people spoke to him. He was the black face, in my mind, of this full development. So he passes away. Leading up to this, a lot of agreements were met between that Mr. Means setting in place with his business, and he, found new housing for many of the residents in that footprint in and around, actually, Greater St. Matthew Baptist Church, like LaBelle and Grand and these streets.
Okay.
So when he passed, a lot of players to me that probably were the big money in these deals didn't just sit on this. They said his wife, they said the Crane story is written with his wife is now engaged to move forward with this development. His wife that also is like a communications manager at Henry Ford Health Systems, I believe, though I think is being used as the black face to be in the black community, and this is Kari opinion on this, because to transition to keep a 9-to-5 job and also manage like a $100 million plus development, I think is very. I don't see that, especially people like us being like, all right, hold on, let's do the Zoom meeting at 6:00 when I get home. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think that's moving forward. So you have Collier's Group, you have Ashley Capital, you have a couple other developers in this whole matter that move forward. In my way, I think that their way of saying this is like, let's just sue everybody. And in this suit, actually, the city of Detroit, city of Highland Park, Comcast or Xfinity, AT&T, DTE, other players are also in this lawsuit as well.
They're named as
plaintiffs. We're all
okay.
So, but I think this is all in a way of like we're so used to hearing things like eminent domain, but we can displace you in new ways by like basically it's like if we
as a city function they don't get to.
I look at it, but it's a way that these business, government partnerships and entities come together in new creative ways to still attain the goal of where their victory still lies, and by basically suppressing your value to a certain point, you're going to get less city services. You're going to get less value,
right? And making you want to leave, which helps them. But I don't want to derail. Send me.
I'll send you a lot of this
I'm very interested in this one because I hadn't heard about it. So yes, please say that.
And it fits under like their brownfield money is Detroit People's Platform. Shout out to them.
Of
It
course.
fits
Well,
under
Linda Campbell is my mentor. I just adore her. So yes.
It's like they're like almost like right at the dollars where all of it does not need to be reported. So that was savvy too.
Of course. Well, of course.
You know.
Everybody's going. What? Okay. I think
So,
you're supposed to be
but
interviewing.
I mean,
What
this is a good. I mean, I like that you're present for this. So like when games like this are being played with community, and I'm a little bit different for the people I know, and I'm interviewing people and engaging and bringing people like you to the studio. I'm functioning through this differently than like, you know, my neighbor that had a stroke.
Right.
But when things like this happen to communities like this, you know, your opinion, what does that do for the psyche of a lot of us when things like this happen?
Well, it's horrible. And I mean, part of what you're seeing me ask these questions is I can imagine, I would always say to people, if you imagine everyday average Detroiter, they have enough shit to deal with. You know, it could be, you know, their children, their parents, their job, their marriage, whatever. I mean, just like you said, what's going on in their neighborhood. And then to hear that you're being sued by a corporation, I mean, how scary could that be? You first of all, being sued, that's why I'm kind of incredulous about this. Being sued for something you have not done, but by the mere fact of your home is sickening to me. It is so distasteful because who is going to go out and invest any of their own resources to respond to
Your
it?
representation.
Exactly. So my thing is, the first thing as a resident, that's why I'm asking, like, you should be able to contact the Department of Neighborhoods or your city council person to at least minimally get some understanding of what does this even mean? Why should you have to go out and you know, invest some resources to defend something like that? That's why it's so disgusting and reprehensible, in my opinion. And then the other piece of it is, if they are already, and I'm, again, as I said, somebody who I had a business, we believed in being a good corporate citizen. If they are already supposed to be a good corporate citizen, why aren't they working with Hope Village? Why aren't they trying to have some kind of community engagement to facilitate something? You know, as you said, a lot of times it's the way you come with it. You're right. Maybe a lot of your neighbors would be ready to go. Maybe if you paid them fairly, they'd be like, yeah, you can have it. But to sue someone, like that's why I said the whole thing, it just reeks of bad faith, in my opinion, as a lawyer.
Yeah. And that's so the presentation. First off, we met at the Just League conference, New Detroit. And
yes.
I was taking pictures. I was bouncing around in different rooms, and I had to stop for a second. As I said, I got like a picture where it's like you definitely looking like you were dressing. It's like wow. It's like that's LinkedIn ready. But with that, that being said, in this space of informing people about some of these housing crises, what's the usual response when you go to give presentations like that at like at a Just League conference and other spaces, and you're presenting this information to groups of people?
Well, yeah, you know, it's so interesting. If I'm in Detroit, obviously it's a warm response because I refer to myself as a daughter of Detroit. I love my city, and so I'm usually trying to speak on things that are impacting our people. If I'm in other places outside the city, sadly, sometimes it's met with like, you know, people are incredulous, like that these kinds of things are going on or it's happening, or that there's not enough attention to it, or people don't know. But I think we got a lot of that from Detroit. Detroit is a really unique place in so many different ways. And so everywhere I go, people are like fascinated to hear about it and about the work. Yeah, and we need to leverage it better for ourselves, as always. But the other piece of it that I'm very sensitive to, and I would always say this, particularly getting back to like the comment I made about my peers and feeling like they weren't connected to the issue. I talk a lot about the understanding I have of like, you kind of ask like, why aren't more people involved? Why don't more people get involved or want to understand? And I try to understand that. And I think I made a joke with Linda about that. I was like, a lot of activists, they don't make it look fun. I mean, it's and people, and which is, it's hard ass work. But I also always say, I want us people to reflect the balance. I have children. Our children should have the ability and the privilege to be children. And so we have to figure out how to balance it, because you could be overwhelmed every day with something that's going on.
Yeah.
Because there is something going on all the time. But I also recognize one, if we want to get more people engaged, they have to understand how to get engaged too. But two, for those who are out here doing the work on our behalf, we have to help them have some balance, because I'm like, we can't, people are killing themselves working for others. And I always say, I never believed in a nonprofit martyr. I don't want people to, martyr themselves for the cause. I respect it and I appreciate it and I love it, but damn it, we should be able to enjoy life too. And that's where, I feel like sometimes I talk a lot about that in my work too, is that, I want to get to that point of understanding how we help people do that better. I have another wonderful mentor. Shout out to Dr. Gloria House, Mama Neb.
Mama Neb. That's my big homie. We got a lot of, that's my big homie.
Yes, she's amazing. And I will never forget, she was, that book that a collective of them did, and it was actually an event that Linda held. And it was, the Plowshares to book. And someone asked the question, just a young woman, about just feeling like she just didn't have the time to do as much as she wanted to get involved. She had young children. She was trying to do this or go to school. And Mama Neb was just so gracious and beautiful in the way she said, what you're doing is a part of this work. What you're doing is contributing to it. You don't have to feel like you have to be doing everything. And it just, I think for so many of us, at least for me, to hear someone like her say that really helped. Because I think that's also the challenge of always feeling like there is so much to do. You can't do it all. And we have to figure out some ways to have balance so that people also can enjoy this life. Life is short. It goes by fast.
I like that. So in that, and I like that you framed it in that reference, because it is so much. You can get in where you can have a defeatist attitude, or you feeling like, wow, I got 12 disciples with me, but I think all of them about to stab me in the back and everything. And it's like, hey, I'm not about to carry my I'm not going to carry my cross to my own crucifixion. You have to, I think that enjoying it in the quality of life, and that's where, I love Detroit is Different. And I always tell people, hey, this is a platform, and I'm telling you right now, and not just for Sarida, but even you watching, it's an open platform. I want people to share those stories. I think the richness, sometimes it'll get many views, sometimes it may not get any, but I do think it's an evergreen record that will exist. And then sometimes people can go back. It's unique sometimes when I see that in a Detroit is Different interview, what's quoted. You know what I'm saying?
That's
and it's like,
wonderful.
wow, that's interesting. You know what I'm saying? But this is my tool that I'm most passionate about and where I'm natural, because that is another thing that can happen. Because sometimes people will say, well, no, running the daycare for the kids while we at the protest really ain't the real work. And it's like, no, everyone plays that role.
Exactly.
Hence, this is I don't even think it's capitalism, but whatever. This system, I believe we all had roles in villages. And I know that
Yes.
In a lot of ways, I think some of the African experience is romanticized amongst my Afrocentric African-centered thinking, but you know what? We can't romanticize it because that's our story. Let's romanticize it. But I do think that the person that built the hut versus the person that the person that built the home, the person that went out and hunted, the person that cooked the food, the drummer, the medicine woman, the griot, the storyteller, everyone played the same role. It wasn't like, well, he the person that's the hut builder. So in reality, he kind of deserves to have more food than, the person that's out here teaching the kids. Like, no, it wasn't. It was a communal thinking, abundance thinking, not scarcity. What scarcity pushes a lot of this stuff, but in that abundance thinking, like this, I believe it has a role. And me personally, and I think a lot of people feel that way. Like if, sometimes I'm doing better in the things that I do. I'm not one of those people that's like, if the person across the street from me has to pay $1 for car insurance because that's what's equitable and fair, I don't care. I don't walk outside and say, well, he paying $1, why I gotta pay $150 a month? Like, I don't think a lot of our community functions like that. That's not what culturally we connect with.
Right. No, you're right. And I agree with that as well. I've always said that we need everyone. Everyone has to figure out their role and what's for them. I always go back to when I was a young attorney and moved back here. I hooked up with the National Conference of Black Lawyers. Shout out to NCBL. That is the legal arm of the movement. Yeah.
You just connected to all. I don't even know how we didn't, like, because Chokwe Lumumba is another one of them. Rest in peace. Yes. He was like my, he was like the massive big homie of big homies before he passed. He'd be like, I'd be on the phone with him, like, he'd hear my wild radical theories, and he'd like, well, Brother Curry, you gotta.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, wonderful. I remember, hearing him and Jeff Edison reflect on their work.
Coolest person in America.
Oh, of course. Oh, yes. Brother Jeff. But my point, when I was with them, most of them were defense attorneys.
Yes.
And I was not. And it was a struggle for me because it just didn't align with my passion. Mm-hmm. And I was just so glad when I found my way to use my skills in furtherance of our people and understanding that if I couldn't do that, it was okay. Yeah. And you're right. And that's why I always say everybody has to figure out what's for them. But back to my earlier comment about, the community benefits. But my hope is that you just all feel connected to us as a community and that you are working and living in your passion in a way that is about, all of us moving forward. So,
and I feel that because it's disorienting for other cultures, like, and these are the why, quote unquote, being in the room, but not just being in the room, but also being able to translate it for our community is so important. Like another analogy I always say, like, if you walked into a job interview and I was like, all right, hit the electric slide, and I played My Eyes Don't Cry No More, I think a lot of black folks would be like, for real? And then a white person would be like, what is this? But that feeling is usually the premise of it. And I like a couple people. I like a lot of, I've had some interesting exchanges, but like, it's like almost everything. And I'm into, like I say, messaging, pageantry, propaganda, like all of the pieces. I was going to, and I'm sure you've probably been down there a bunch of times, and I like Derek and a couple of other people there, but I was going to a meeting with, at Invest Detroit one time, and they were talking about empowering Detroit neighborhoods. Right now, I think they just got like $300 million from Bank of America, too. And I was telling them, I was like, and it was weird. I was giving a critique to the group. I was like, me even having to go through like 3 security checkpoints and then come up an elevator to like the whatever floor and look down on the city. This is so disorienting for me to even begin to speak about what would be empowering for my community, that I already kind of have a toxic shock. It'd be like bringing, that Bank of America $300 million investor into like a horseshoe game over here. You know what I'm saying? Right. Where a couple pit bulls that, ain't leashed just walking around. You know what I'm saying? And then saying like, all right, man, so you know what I'm saying? Let's get that $300 million check. But I'm saying, like, it's even the spaces and places and how we present things. Hence, some of us that can translate, I agree with you. Some of the onus falls on us, but it also is the cultural competency of making it plain for where things need to be. Because a lot of this stuff, if you're willing to actually come and meet with us, which is more social capital, and you may get, you may hear some choice words. You may get taught not a child of God, but that's the start of it. But that's the rhythm and the flow. And then eventually from that rhythm and flow, we get to an understanding, because that's that's what we do in our community. At least in my, I know over here in my hood, it's all types of stuff that sometimes is like out of ordinary, but I know how to respond and engage. And I would never think to sue my neighbor. My thought process is like, I have to communicate with them. I have to talk to them. I have to, engage differently and meet under our cultural competency, where that's where it does feel neglectful. It feels dismissive of even how we're doing, because we even to get a victory, quote unquote, from their world, we have to walk into their world, translate it for them, and then come back to our world and translate it back to us as well. When in reality, it's like it's a way to get both parties together, especially if you want to engage with us. And if not, just leave us alone and let us do what we do.
If it's not genuine, yes. I mean, I've been hearing a lot of people say recently, change happens at the pace of relationships. I don't think a lot of people like that, because you're right. The time it takes to actually meet and engage and understand with people, and that's where the imbalance of power comes in.
Yeah.
Because with the money and the power, you're feeling like, I don't have to wait on you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, at least in some of my work, we've been trying to say, but because I would always say, I'm sorry, you can't, at this age, you cannot convince me of the goodness of people. Like, everybody just wants to do the right thing, because we know it's not true. Everybody don't want to just do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, the right thing would be to come together and to have that kind of thing. But if you don't want to do the right thing, I'm at least going to try and impress upon you that not doing the right thing is going to be more, less profitable for you. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a problematic for you.
Yes.
So if you're not doing it for the right thing, I'm at least convinced you that you need to do it for, what your interest is. Mm-hmm. And that's where I don't think they don't want to do it for the right reason, or maybe they don't know. We'll say maybe they don't know, and that's another way that we've tried to help them understand. But if they don't want to do it for that, then we at least have to impress upon them how to do it and what makes sense, even on the business case of it. Because I don't think people really care. I think a lot of it, there's like, people do enough in the moment, particularly in this moment, enough to say they've done it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's real. Doesn't necessarily mean it's genuine. So,
in closing, I'm gonna have my classic Detroiters different questions in a second, but before those, the work now. What do you see next in housing residency for Detroit? What and I know that's a big question, but what do you look for? And then furthermore, if you're that legacy Detroiter.
Mm-hmm.
How should our eyes be on the swivel of what's to come?
Let me do that part first. That's easier. If you're a legacy Detroiter, and what you should be focused on is, one, if you want to stay in Detroit, keep your home.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to leave, make sure you are getting appropriate value for your home. I think and if you want to just be involved in your community and you're concerned about displacement or gentrification, get involved in some of the community groups that are working to do community planning around, so that you have a say in what's going to happen. I feel like that's kind of the pushback. What I said Saturdays and what I said at the Just Lead panel is all pretty similar, because the issue of housing is so huge right now.
Yeah.
And somebody always preface by saying, I'm not a housing expert, I'm not a developer. This is all through community development and learning and observing and working on this stuff. And I feel like it has to be, I keep using the same analogy because I just loved it so much. Shout out to the brother who said it. I can't remember your name, but he said there's no silver bullet. He's like, it's silver buckshot. We have to have multiple approaches to it. And that's the real truth of housing.
I like it.
Because from all the stuff I've learned, we know we are in this moment particularly where there's all these challenges to housing.
Yeah.
There's the challenge of the costs of it, the interests of developers, the subsidy needed, all of that. And the pushback that we need to do as residents to say, we need you, leadership, planning for our neighborhoods, not just planning for a particular population that you think you want to attract because they'll have more money. And, that's the kind of thing we need. So, we need to support community development organizations. They are not private developers. They are not trying to make a huge profit. So they have the strong interest in doing affordable housing like they did before, but they need the support. They need the money to keep their roofs up. They need the capacity building. They need all of that. We need to do more of that. That's some of when you mentioned like Invest Detroit, some of what we try to work with them, and they are doing much more of that. But that's, again, always comes from the residents saying, this is what we need. We need to continue that. I said we need to continue the advocacy. We have got to demand that we need, I always shout out to Arthur, who used to run the, who used to be here in Detroit running first housing and then, everything else, because we would always, I appreciate the way he would listen. I would always be like, Arthur, we need a housing that supports the 30% AMI population. We know that Detroiters, we have high poverty in Detroit.
Very much so.
And so you can't be talking about 80%, AMI, area median income is going to be affordable. That's not affordable.
No.
And so...
Also, I mean, Theo, another, a mix of two things. I just want to add this point into it, though it'll definitely be like a long Kari soliloquy of like what Theo presented, that the average salary, annual income of a Detroiter is $85,000. So when you hear that, you're like, what the hell are you talking about? But the reality is the person working in Detroit don't live in Detroit. So the person living in Detroit.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, because I was gonna say that's high. That's not the average income. You said the average salary. Yeah.
Exactly. But if you work outside Detroit and you commute into Detroit and actually get up on your information, go back, watch my interview when I interviewed Anthony Adams, and that's really a lot of the revenue sharing from Michigan, because at one point in time the deal, and this is why Detroit never should have gone and accepted that false bankruptcy. But this is the deal was Detroit always had a tax on if you work in Detroit and you live outside Detroit.
Right.
Those rates were cut in half in exchange for the revenue sharing of the state of Michigan giving Detroit their fair share. Right. And that's something that our current executive administration does not go after, and no executive administration has gone after the way it needs to have been gone after, because Mayor Archer at the time, his first administration, I think we're going to probably end up in another Mayor Archer administration eventually, but he never pursued that, right? So because you forego on an agreement of the revenue sharing, we have all these outsiders using Detroit as leverage and profiting from it and moving their tax base to Troy, Novi, Livonia, Warren, places that ain't Detroit. So basically in that exchange, we're not getting what's owed to us. Yep. So when you have that becomes a problem. The other big problem, as I help my aunt, 80-something-year-old aunt, you know what I'm saying, sell a house and buy a house. So in this whole process of selling the house and buying the new house, I learned one of the key things is people appraising properties.
Let's say appraisals,
The appraisal process and the amount of appraisers that look like us, few and damn near don't exist. So the whole appraisal process itself, your appraiser's driving down from, where Farmington Hills.
Shout out to my girl
West
Keely.
Bloomfield.
She's an appraiser. Yes, I know.
Very few. You know
Very
what I'm saying?
few. I do.
So when you get these appraisers that are only appraising properties based on saying like, well, the valuation, basically going on Zillow saying, well, like this sold for that, and what they can define as communities and neighborhoods and where things go, and you find out all of this stuff like, damn, I didn't even know that this was a village or whatever, a subdivision or whatever this stuff is on paper, and how these communities are appraised. God forbid something like the brownfield pop up in your neighborhood that you didn't know, and it's still shocking. As I said, I was like, damn, they labeled this as a distraught, you can't build anything district, so the government got to put money in when it was clearly a house there. last month.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? So it's things like this that can affect things. So hence we need our own. As far as I'm concerned, this is the Kari thinking. We can do everything on our own. That we need to reject their systems, and their systems still rely on us. It's so much CFDI money, basically other government money of being in poverty that are infused in all these banks. You know, they'll put First Independence Bank first, but I'm talking about Chase, Bank of America, PNC, whatever they're naming. Cobo Hall, whatever that bank.
TCF.
Yeah, TCF. You know, Honey, like these banks.
Right.
Have leveraged this whole quote unquote, like, look at this. This city is just a bombed out and depleted.
Right, right.
Whatever. So the government, you got to give us money for this.
That's the narrative.
And you don't even know that, you know, then they'll turn around and, you know what I'm saying, you know, have a pizza party for kids in the neighborhood and say, like, hey, you know, we give back. It's like, no, you're not giving back.
Yeah.
That money was our money. That was our tax money. You needed our tax money. You know, and I mean, another radical Detroit idea, like I always say, Kari idea is like, I really wish Detroit could be like Washington, D.C. and become a district of its own, because this state is Wyoming or Montana if you take away Detroit. Nobody cares about, you know what I'm saying? I mean, you know, I got homies outside of this, but it's not in the same leverage, but they're leveraging the value of Detroit to pull in their dollars and then throw us some pennies off the side of the road, which is not all about money, but it becomes about money when you're exploiting what I got to get your resources.
Right.
And my people are in a condition where we feel like we're in a rock and a hard place, not even recognizing that this is a $1 trillion industry connecting to exploiting us as citizens and residents. And like you say, you got other stuff. You got work, you got kids, you got, you know, family, you got other stuff. You can't really focus on all this stuff.
Right. And that's how they do it.
Yeah.
And that's how it's done.
Yeah. So we definitely gonna get you back. But classic Detroit is different questions. Nah, and I like this. This is it's like when the role reverses, it's always cool. Classic Detroit is different question. First car, year, make, and model.
First car.
And when did you get it?
Oh, come on. 85 Toyota Cressida, my father's. He actually shipped it to me. I was in law school.
Wow. When did you get it?
I was in California. I got it in 95, I think.
Oh, so it was a decade in.
Yeah.
Okay.
96.
And then he give you like the dad advice. He was like, all right, now you're going to have to, it can last another.
You know, he didn't. It was so sweet because, like I said, I was in California and it was just rough. You know, law school was rough and couldn't afford anything. And I was just so grateful. I loved that car. It was burgundy. It had a sunroof. I remember riding around listening to AZs cutting that. It was a wonderful time. Yes.
Where was the first place you went when you got it?
Oh, my goodness. You know what I used to do back then? It probably was, I was living in Oakland. And I would drive.
You went from you went to the West Coast Detroit.
Yeah, I did. I did. I went to Berkeley for law school, and when I was out there, just to clear my head, I think, you know, growing up in Detroit, I loved the river. I would drive across the Bay Bridge from Oakland to San Francisco, and it was just beautiful and just the opportunity to think. But yes, that was probably the first thing I did with it.
Okay. All right. Next question. You are the DJ at the end of the Detroit fireworks. You get to play 2 songs. You're at Woodward and Jefferson. Everybody's looking at you. What songs you playing?
At Woodward and Jefferson.
Yep, the fireworks just ended.
I get to play 2.
I usually say 3,
okay. If I did 2 Knee Deep.
Ah, that's a classic. That was actually one from NG Akai as well. Shout out Mama NG.
How you do that, everybody? See, that's family too.
Exactly. It's like
Mama and Gia, so okay.
Not just knee deep. You never go wrong with that.
No, and I was so I got to experience him when he was in town that time. The other one that came to mind was, of course, to wrap up the night. That's how we used to wrap up the parties, was Before I Let Go. The Maze version, please. The Frankie Beverly and Maze
Here
version.
we
That's
go.
the only one. I don't want to talk about any remakes.
We've heard that before, too. She did not like the Homecoming rendition.
No.
She may have liked the Homecoming program, but it's like, yeah.
I don't know.
Actually, comedian I like, Roddy Jordan, has a joke about that. He was like, yeah, we was at a family reunion. They put on the Beyonce version of that, and people damn near they rushed the DJ.
Yeah, it's sacrilegious, but okay. A last one. Well, of course, we have to do Homegrown. I have to do Stevie. Which would be my one I want here? There's so many. Oh, it would depend on my mood. What's the end of the fireworks, you said? More partyish. I'd probably do like Do I Do or something like that.
Okay. All right, you keeping the people hyped. So people gonna be partying. It's like if you have a birthday party and you want to try a new DJ that wants people dancing. You know who to get.
Yeah.
Orchestrate that playlist. Last question. If you had to rename Woodward after one Detroiter, who would it be and why?
Oh my goodness. One Detroiter. Rename Woodward. After one Detroiter. Ooh, Woodward. So many. Come on. That's a very hard question. So I don't want to do the obvious. Obviously, I have great respect for Mayor Young, but I'm not going to do the obvious.
He's usually the vote. Like he may have like 300 votes to like
everybody
others.
knows him. I'm trying to So I would obviously if you were doing Woodward, he should be. But I'm just thinking there's so many other amazing Detroiters. All right, I'm gonna do it like this because I don't know why he just popped into my head, and I feel like he deserved. He's deserving of a street. Ron Scott.
Okay.
And I just, he reached out to me when I was young. We didn't talk about it. I meant to go back to your question around what was happening with affirmative action in Michigan and all of that. But yeah, he reached out to me and got me involved in some of that when I had just moved back to the city, but also just his commitment to the work and the way he also did it. He was a mentor as well, and I think that's just so important, and that's the way you bring people into it.
I like it.
So, yeah.
I like it. Yeah, about Ron, definitely knew him well. A lot of story. I mean, his onboarding of even Mama Kim Shirobi always says like, Ron has got me into this, and it's like, okay, that's cool. And I'm like, oh, this is y'all hood for real. Like, oh, okay, interesting.
He connected me to David Rambo. I was like young, went on that show, and we talked about some stuff that was happening in Detroit at the time. So.
Yeah, legend in this media world. I'm working on a project where I want to bring him in. I've been for a while. I know he's like, brother, you need to. But definitely powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Yes. Peace be.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.